The Chinese zodiac has 12 animals, 11 of them are real. The rat, the ox, the tiger, the rabbit, the snake, the horse, the goat, the monkey, the rooster, the dog, the pig, all real, all verifiable, all animals you could point to right now. And then there's the 12th, the one they call mythical, the dragon. Here's what nobody asks. Why would one of the oldest and most precise civilizations in human history, a culture that documented astronomy, medicine, and war with extraordinary detail, put a creature they had never seen alongside 11 animals they saw every single day? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, and once you hear what we're about to cover, you won't be able to unsee it. Now, before we go anywhere unusual, let's start with what historians actually tell us, because most of the official story is true. Paleontologists discovered massive fossilized bones in the 1800s. Scientists classified them, named them, built entire museums around them. In 1842, a British anatomist named Richard Owen grouped 3 ancient reptile species together and gave them a name, Dinosauria, terrible lizard. And with that single word, the modern understanding of prehistoric life was born. But here's what the textbooks gloss over. Richard Owen didn't just name dinosaurs, he specifically excluded something else, something that had already been discovered, something that flew, something with wings made of skin. In 1809, a French naturalist named Georges Cuvier examined a strange fossil and named it pterodactyl, wing finger. And by 1834, just 8 years before Owen named dinosaurs, scientists had already grouped these flying creatures into their own separate category. Pterosaurs, not dinosaurs, cousins, but not the same family. And here's where the story starts to crack open. The American Museum of Natural History, one of the most respected scientific institutions on the planet, states it clearly. Pterosaurs and dinosaurs separated from a common ancestor approximately 250 million years ago. The way they tell it, calling a pterosaur a dinosaur is like calling a human an ape, related, but not the same thing. Now ask yourselves, why does that distinction matter? Because of what pterosaurs actually looked like. Forget the bones for a second. Think about the body. Pterosaurs had wings made of skin, not feathers, not scales. Skin, stretched across an elongated fourth finger, exactly the way a bat's wings are structured. Their bodies were covered in hair-like filaments. Scientists call them pycnofibers. They were warm-blooded. They could fly actively, not just glide. And the largest of them, Quetzalcoatlus, had a wingspan of 33 feet and stood as tall as a giraffe when it was on the ground. A warm-blooded, skin-winged flying reptile, the height of a giraffe. Tell me that doesn't sound like something. Now here's where the official story gets genuinely strange. For everything we know about pterosaurs, we have almost nothing left of them. The American Museum of Natural History says 90% of all pterosaur specimens ever found come from just 5 locations on Earth. 5, Brazil, China, Germany, the United States, England. In 25 summers of digging through the Gobi Desert, one of the richest fossil sites on the planet, AMNH researchers found thousands of dinosaur bones, and 1 pterosaur bone. 1. Why? Because pterosaur bones were hollow, thin-walled, built for flight. A 2025 study from the University of Leicester put it plainly. Hollow, thin-walled bones are ideal for flight, but terrible for fossilization. The odds of preserving one are already slim, and most pterosaur fossils that do survive, they're flattened, shattered, incomplete. A near-complete specimen found in Scotland in 2022 made international news, because finding one close to whole is that rare. Peer-reviewed research confirms it. What we know about pterosaurs is dominated by what survived, which means what we don't know is enormous. Their bones dissolved, their soft tissue vanished, their wings, made of skin, left almost nothing behind. And yet, every ancient civilization on Earth drew them. That's not an exaggeration. From ancient Mesopotamia, to medieval Europe, to China, to the Americas, to Aboriginal Australia, dragons appear. History.com confirmed in 2025. No matter where you look, in medieval Europe, ancient China, pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, or ancient Mesopotamia, dragons are everywhere. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written over 4,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia, describes a fire-breathing dragon-fanged beast named Humbaba. Beowulf, written around 1000 AD, centers on a fire-breathing dragon in Anglo-Saxon England. The Aztecs had the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl. The Aboriginal Australians have the rainbow serpent. And China has the longest continuous dragon tradition of any civilization in human history. These cultures had no known contact with each other during their formative periods. No shared language, no shared trade routes, no shared stories. And they all describe the same creature: flying, reptilian, dangerous, enormous. There's no comfortable explanation for that. But here's where it gets personal for the scientists, because the debate doesn't stop at mythology. One camp of historians says, the dragon legends came from fossilized bones that ancient people found and didn't understand. Another camp says they came from living animals, large crocodiles, giant snakes, Komodo dragons. And a third camp says they came from something else entirely, something we haven't fully accounted for. The experts don't agree, and that gap in the official explanation is wide enough to drive questions through. Now let's talk about something that's been called one of the greatest mysteries in paleontology: the Tyrannosaurus rex, 45 feet long, a skull measuring 5 feet, one of the most powerful predators that ever walked the earth, and arms that were 3 feet long. 3 feet. On a 45-foot animal? A 2022 paper published by a paleontologist at the University of California, Berkeley suggested the arms may have shortened over evolutionary time, possibly to avoid being bitten off by other T-Rexes during feeding frenzies. Another theory says they were used for grasping. Another says they helped the animal rise from the ground. A 2025 peer-reviewed study in Royal Society Open Science confirmed it plainly. The evolutionary drivers behind theropod forelimb reduction are poorly understood. That's scientists saying in print, we don't fully know. We have found something enormous, we've given it a name, and we still don't know what its arms were for. Now, could the arms have been related to wings? On T-Rex specifically, the fossil anatomy doesn't support that. The bone structure points toward grasping, not flight. T-Rex and pterosaurs were on completely different evolutionary branches. But the broader question, why do forelimbs shrink in so many different dinosaur lineages independently, that is genuinely open? Science says so itself. Now come back to China for a moment, because the Chinese didn't just draw dragons on temple walls. They used them in medicine. Medical texts from the 3rd century before the Common Era, over 2,000 years ago, describe the bones of dragons being ground up and used to treat epilepsy, heart conditions, anxiety, and disembowelment. The bones were real. They were prehistoric fossils, bones of mammoths, giant apes, ancient mammals, and in some cases, real dinosaur bones. In 2007, scientists excavated a village in Henan province, China. That village had spent decades digging up bones from the earth, boiling them, and giving them to children to treat dizziness and leg cramps. They called them dragon bones. The scientists who came to investigate found a 60-foot dinosaur directly beneath that village. The villagers weren't making the creature up, they were handling its remains. And now we come back to the zodiac, the 12 animals, 11 real, 1 mythical. But here's what most people miss. The Chinese didn't describe the dragon vaguely. They described it in extraordinary physical detail: antlers of a deer, head of a camel, eyes of a demon, neck of a snake, claws of an eagle, paws of a tiger. That is not how you describe something you imagined. That is how you describe something you observed. And the Smithsonian Magazine notes, the dragon is the only mythological creature in the Chinese zodiac. Chinese emperors wore robes embroidered with dragons from at least the Tang dynasty. This wasn't casual folklore. This was the symbol of imperial power. For a civilization that valued precision above almost everything, they staked their highest institution of authority on the image of a creature that supposedly never existed. So here is where we land, and this is the part that doesn't get said out loud enough. Pterosaurs were real. That is confirmed. They were flying reptiles with bat-like skin wings, hollow bones, warm-blooded bodies, and wingspans that rivaled fighter jets. Their bones almost never survive. Confirmed by the American Museum of Natural History, by University of Leicester researchers, by peer-reviewed science. Dragon legends exist on every continent, with consistent physical descriptions from cultures that had no contact with each other. And the Chinese civilization, arguably the most meticulous documenters in human history, placed a detailed, physically specific flying reptile in their most sacred cultural calendar, listed alongside 11 animals that are unquestionably real. One expert says fossil bones inspired the myths. Another says living reptiles inspired them. And a quiet third possibility, one that mainstream history doesn't spend a lot of time on, is that some of what ancient peoples described was exactly what they said it was, not myth. History, because this was never just about a legend, it was about what happens when a civilization documents something and the next civilization decides it couldn't have been real. What do we lose in that gap? What gets reclassified from history into myth? The answer isn't settled. The scientists haven't closed the file, the fossil record has enormous gaps, the cultural records are consistent in ways that are hard to explain away, and somewhere, in a village in China that was still boiling dinosaur bones in 2007, the oldest question in human mythology was still being asked. What are these bones from? What kind of creature left them here? And where did it go? I'm not telling you what to believe, but I am asking you to sit with the evidence: a flying reptile, giraffe height, 33-foot wingspan, covered in hair-like filaments, with skin wings like a bat, whose bones almost never survive, every ancient civilization independently drawing the same creature, the most precise culture in history, calling it real enough to put in their calendar, and science in 2025 still writing papers titled Poorly Understood. So here's the question I'll leave with you. What do you think ancient people were actually seeing? Was it a myth passed from culture to culture, across oceans, across continents, across languages they didn't share? Or were they just doing what humans have always done, looking at something real and trying to find the right words for it? Tell me in the comments, because the file is still open.